So Jake and I are doing we're doing the session. We're doing the guided meditation. We come out of the guided meditation and we're asking for a sign from the spirits, and we're sitting there like, spirits, if you're here, let us know of your presence. And there's just like this like boom that's just in the middle, kind of feels in the middle of the room. Jake is on one side, I'm on the other, and it kind of, you could feel it in your chest, just boom, like this like low kind of vibration.
It was very creepy.
And I just stop and I just stare at Jake, and Jake just stares at me,
and we're like, what the?
And we're.
Hey, what's up, guys? Thank you so much for checking out the channel. I've been wanting to do a video like this for a while now, just kind of introducing myself to you. I'm a filmmaker, former educator. I've had this podcast idea now for about 2 years. We started back in October 2024, and I'm still navigating it, still trying to get my sea legs with it. So I really do hope that you stick around. I hope that you've enjoyed the videos that I put out so far. I overall love storytelling, and I love hearing stories. I love documentaries, and I will speak with anyone and give them a platform where they can tell their story and bring that to you, and hope that you enjoy it and hope that you like it. If you haven't already, please hit that subscribe button, hit the like button, leave us a comment. I read all the comments, share these videos with your friends. And also, if you'd like to follow me on any of my social media accounts, those links are in the description below. If you'd like to be on the show, you can reach me at any of those links below, and we can talk and go back and forth, and we can see if we can get you on the show here. So thanks again, guys, so much for watching, and I will see you later. All right, we are rolling, gentlemen. Thank you for coming.
Sure, absolutely.
Yeah.
So, for the people who don't know you, did you want to just introduce yourself? Because I know both of you have an interesting background.
Sure. Well, I'm Jake Cordero. This is Albert Lucio. We've been conducting. We founded the Austin Séance nearly 10 years ago, 2016. We may have actually done some private seance sessions even prior to that. My background's in journalism.
You got a car? Was that the pausing part?
No, that's fine. We're good. We're good.
Okay.
We're good.
All right. You want to start that over, Jake?
Yeah.
I apologize.
Anyway, I'm Jake Cordero. My background is in journalism. So I've spent most of my career as a professional journalist. I've worked for some major newspapers. And sort of in the course of all that, I, had some sort of interesting experiences. I've been sort of investigated a haunted pool hall in Fort Worth, and I was sent to Mexico City to cover a cult murder. Been to Haiti, where in the course of my reporting, I sort of observed some sort of crazy, interesting practices. Sort of voodoo practices were very interesting to me. But that's mostly it's been my professional career prior to getting into the seance business with Albert. I'll let Albert speak for himself.
Yeah, I'm Albert Lucio, and I'm the other half of the Austin Séance. My background, my degree is in sociology and psychology, and I've kind of worked in that field for years and years and years. But in the realm of the occult, I've worked with different ghost hunting groups in Texas and a couple other places, going out investigations and kind of just seeing how they function and how they work. And then I spent a couple years working with different types of psychics. And then Jake and I met in the 2010s, early 2010s, and we started talking, and we thought that there's some really interesting history here with the seance, and a way to present it to the public that isn't the way typically you go to a seance and you see theatrical kind of stuff. You see a magician or you see a play, and we wanted to be able to kind of bring some of the authenticity and some of the experiences that people were having at the turn of the century that previous century.
Okay. Yeah. So this whole seance is basically communicating with the other side.
That's right.
And so the way that you present it is the way that it was from the 19th century.
That's with some modern touches, but
yeah. So with some modern touches, the concept is there of how it was originally kind of done. The way that we approach it is it's not so the history is very fascinating and wild, and that's a whole, like, we can go down all kinds of rabbit holes on the cultural impact and the religious impacts and the political impacts and all kinds of ways that it impacted, our society and changed stuff. But ultimately, what we look at is the kind of the original format that wasn't necessarily medium led. It was really a call and reply. Then that the idea is that you reach you, we'd be here and we would kind of maybe sing some songs, get together, and then ask the spirit to speak to us, and we would call out and we would see what kind of replies that they may give. And typically these are in the form of rasps, and we could talk about the history, if you like, about the first kind of seance, where that comes from. And then that kind of continues, and there's mediums that come in and they start to kind of take the space, and you can go to a medium-led seance, but it always kind of comes back to it being a do-it-yourself. And that was the big part of the movement, was you didn't need to be a psychic. You didn't have any kind of special abilities or powers. You just had to be willing to play a couple of games in the dark, and you may commune with the spirits. And that's kind of that's our approach, is making it accessible. The idea is when you get done with one of our sessions, that you can go home and do it yourself.
That's right. And I think that there's a long tradition of Victorian parlor games associated with spiritualist practices. And so a lot of what our workshops and even our seance sessions are approached sort of with that idea that they should be fun, celebratory. Sometimes they can be spooky sometimes, but for the most part, we hope our sitters enjoy themselves. Mm-hmm. And it's sort of in the spirit of these sort of Victorian parlor games is how we approach it, which, as Albert mentions, a very sort of historical approach.
Mm-hmm. You just said about like the first seance. Mm-hmm. So I'm just from what I remember, did it have to do with something like tapping the wall or like?
Well, it was tapping all over the place. So the first seance, so we know what happens in the first seance because it's actually very well recorded. There's an attorney named E. Lewis who lives in Rochester who came just a few days after the first seance and collected affidavits from about 23 different witnesses. And you can see those affidavits in a book called A Report of Mysterious Noises in the Home of John D. Fox kind of thing. So, so you can find that and you can read it. And it's very fascinating. There's a lot of very fascinating things because when you read it, it talks about how, when you read it and you think about what you know about it and what we see in pop culture, it's very different. But essentially what's told in the story by Margarita Fox, the mother, and by John Fox, and then all these other people, but is essentially the family's renting a home. They've been renting the home since the December of 1847 because they were having another house built. So they're in this log cabin waiting for their other house to be built. And this kind of knocks, right, start to emanate from mysterious places, unknown places, as the family's preparing to go to sleep every night. And this happens for about 16 days. And so in the affidavit, it's the mother says that they're exhausted and tired. They haven't been able to sleep because every night around 9 p.m. till about early in the morning, 5 or 6, these knocks begin, and they just continue throughout the night. And so on March 31st, 1848, as the family's going to bed, it's about 9 o'clock, as the family's going to bed, Margaret's already in her bed, John D. Fox, her husband's coming to bed, the knocks begin. And then the girls, they never name the girls. It's Katie and Maggie Fox, but their cousin may also be there in the bed with them because their cousin, Leah's daughter, would sometimes come and stay with them. Leah was the older of the Fox sisters, the less famous.
I guess it would be a niece, right?
Yeah, a niece. Yeah, sorry, a niece. And so as they're going to bed, the knocks begin, and the novel thing occurs, right? So this is like very cinematic. When you read the affidavit, it's very cinematic. It's like the family's in the home, they're tired, they're going to bed, these knocks appear. And then the young one, so they never say her name, but we suppose this is Katie Fox, she's the youngest. She sits up in bed and she snaps her fingers and she says, follow, right? And snaps her fingers 3 times, I believe, 3 or 4 times. And as Margaret says in the affidavit, as soon as the girl's hands went, it replied. And so
that technically became the first seance.
And that's the first kind of communication.
The idea that, it's people in a dark room having two-way communication. Mm-hmm. And that sort of definitionally sort of became what became known as the first seance. That was the first act.
Yeah. And then Maggie, or the next girl, they say the other girl, they don't, again, mention the names, so she sits up and she says, count 4. And she claps her hands 4 times, and 4 replies. The girls freak out. They huddle in bed. So that says that they huddle together. And then their mother gets up and she says, count 10. And she gets 10 knocks that reply back to her. And then she asks a couple questions. Are you spirit, inter-spirit? And then she eventually says, if I continue to ask you questions, could I go get my neighbors? And so she gets a reply, yes. And so that night they go out and get their neighbors. They have some best friends. I want to say the Redfords, but it's not the Redfords. It's the it'll come to me. But they go, they get their neighbors, they get other people. They even find fishermen on the shore that are fishing at night. They bring them all into this log cabin. There's about 30 of them, and they all listen to these knocks. And the family, this is the most interesting part, they leave the home at midnight, and it is the neighbors that continue with the seance until the early morning. And they're calling out letters, numbers, words. They get the letters CB. And CB is the spirit that they're speaking to, and he claims that he was murdered by the previous tenant in the home and was buried in the basement. And so they begin to dig up the basement floor that morning.
Yeah.
They hit a water table and it begins to flood, but this kind of becomes the first seance. It's not called a seance at that point because they don't know what it is, right?
Yeah.
It's kind of like the First World War isn't called the First World War at the time. We didn't know there was going to be a second one. So it was just this kind of mysterious event. And they're called spirit sessions later on after that. But there's this first event, and it is so crazy that the next day there are over 300 people that are there. And so they create committees to go around the house and stand in there to try to find the source of the mysterious noises, and they can't find it. And the family's not even there. The Fox sisters aren't even. They're present, but they're sent home as this committee is done. They're sent to the neighbors to their friend's house.
And so the knocks are continuing
to go
even after the family has left, and so according to the affidavits, the affidavits, by the way, you can get at the Austin Séance website. we have a reproduction of the Austin Séance on the website.
So is this like the beginning of like the spirit boards?
Spirit boards come in a little bit later, but the spirit boards are there's different iterations the spirit board goes through. So the talking board that we know about, right, the Ouija board, that is something that is built decades after the planchette is built. The planchette is the first part of the thing of that board to be created, but before it's a planchette, it's a top hat. And we kind of talk. We didn't put that in the thing that we talk about, the turning tables, but it starts with a game where people put their hands on a top hat, and the top hat will begin to spin and move around. And then this also becomes part of table turning. You put your hands on the table, and we would sit here, and the table would begin to like undulate and turn and spin, and then that becomes part of like this interesting game with the top hat. Where they put it back, they can put letters and numbers and words on the top hat, and it begins to slide and move around to those letters and numbers. They get rid of the top hat, they keep the table, and then the table slowly evolves to the planchette. That's one of the stories. There's another story. There's two kind of competing stories, and one of them is a seance that is occurring in France. I believe Allan Kardec might be part of it, in which a spirit says to go to the other room and get a basket, and take the basket and put it on the table with a sheet of paper on it and plunge a pencil through the middle of that wicker basket, right? And then they put their hands on it and it begins to write. And so this is known as an automatic writing device. And so that the planchette that you're used to with the little hole in it, right?
Yeah.
There you go, oh, that's the letter number it's pointing at. That's actually where the pencil used to be. And so this was known as an automatic writing device. You put your hands on it, and you put a piece of paper on it, and it would write and draw on that paper. And then eventually somebody added the board back. So in some sense, it kind of goes full circle, right? You have your top hat, it's sliding around, and then eventually it comes back to the board.
The planchette predated the board itself, and I'm sure that this will be presented later on, but we're right in the middle of some anniversaries. So tomorrow is the anniversary of the first
seance.
First seance. Today is March 30th.
29th?
30th? Today's March 30th. So tomorrow's March 31st. It's the 178th anniversary of the first seance. Yesterday was the anniversary of the first appearance of what is probably a Ouija board in the popular press. It appeared in the New York Herald Tribune. The anniversary was on March 30th, I believe, 1886. So that happened, several decades after the first seance with the Fox sisters. And what they described in the New York Herald Tribune was a device that sounded almost exactly like the Ouija board that we're familiar with now. It had numbers or letters across the top. It had numbers. It had a yes or a no. I think it had a goodbye on it. It was a rectangular board. And so this was a device. This was before there was any patent filed for the device, but that came along, I guess, probably a decade or so, at least after the planchette.
Well, there's a quote that I really like in this book called "Spiritual Entertainment: Rise of Modern Media." I think is the title. I probably got that wrong, but the author says the moment the planchette appeared, or the moment the talking board appeared, many mediums lost their jobs. Because you could just play at home, right?
You didn't
need to have a medium to sit there and commune with the dead. You just had your planchette and your board.
And the thing about the board, the Ouija board itself, which I think Albert and I, maybe you've come around, but I think it was more fun on the board than Albert is. But at any rate, the board was a very, very, very popular item during the 1960s and 70s. And so we talk about doing it yourself. And folks of my age or older will remember a time when everybody had a Ouija board in their house, and it was an object of slumber parties, and it was a lot of fun. And the Parker Brothers toy company sold over 1 million copies in 1 year alone. And so it outsold Monopoly 1 year.
Yeah.
So it was a very, very popular item for a long time. And I don't think people realize today kind of what a cultural impact that board has had on our society and world society in a lot of ways as well. There's religious movements. The Kodai religion in Vietnam is based on Ouija inspiration. There's various important pieces of literature based on the use of the board and the planchette. So it's a fascinating history that comes all the way from Victorian times to right now. Right, people still use the board and play with it and have fun with it.
Yeah, I just heard an interesting story about how after the Civil War, there were people who went around with these spirit boards to women who were widows and sold it to them. It's like you could speak with your husband or whatever, and they made a lot of money, as charlatans, with that. And then we got the Ouija board from, was it Parker Brothers?
I don't know. Yeah, I don't know. I'm not familiar with that. To my knowledge, the first reference that we know of was I think in 1886. I need to look at the year again. So I guess that was after the Civil War. I mean, that's about a few decades after the Civil War. So I guess maybe that tracks. Maybe that's the same story. But they were not there's no reliable, as far as I'm aware of, reliable reference to the Ouija board before that first reference in the New York Herald Tribune.
Well, what you get during the Civil War. So the movement of spiritualism kind of actually changes post Civil War, and so the original movement was very much, and it still maintains that, but there's like these other ties to it. But during the Civil War, obviously, there's a rise in the interest because of people losing their loved ones and not being able to communicate, or they're going off to war not knowing if they're alive or dead. And so there is a rise in spiritualism, and there is a rise of mediums across the U.S. that are helping to make that connection, right? Or whether through charlatanism or through their own belief that this is what they're doing. And so we do see that rise. The one thing that spiritualism offered and why it was so popular, it's really wild. There's this confluency of a whole bunch of events that are all coming together. One of them is there's a thing called the Second Great Awakening, which helps to create the rise of Protestantism and Methodism, and to kind of create a more secular kind of religion. But then what spiritualism comes in and does and say to all, in front of all these other religions is like, we can give proof of the afterlife, right? Like you could be, on all these other religions, you have to wait. You had to be good. You had to wait. And then when your time came and the Lord called you, then you got to find out what that was like. And spiritualism said, well, we can offer that, and we can do it in a scientific way. And so spiritualism is this weird blend of science and kind of faith. And so people were drawn to that, and that helps to really kind of perpetuate that. At the same time, we are having a lot of different sciences. We're a young nation. we're trying to establish our own religion. So we do get a lot of religious fervor that's occurring in a place called the Burned Over District in New York. We get the Shakers, which are Palmyra, New York, they're the first American mystics. They would go into trances and kind of go into these convulsions and kind of commune in this other kind of interesting space. And there were also people that I think are associated with some free love movement, which is also associated with spiritualism. We have Mormonism that comes out of this. Joseph Smith is born from New York and moves out with his congregation into Utah. So we get kind of that. We get a lot of really interesting kind of stuff that's coming from there. And the spiritualism is one of those, and it offers this thing. And so that appeal as it goes into the Civil War is we can commune with the dead. We can speak to the dead. And we see a lot of figures that are motivated by that. Abraham Lincoln is one of those. Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. This is during during the Great War, the First World War. Sir Oliver Lodge. They lose children and they want to see how they can connect, right? And so we see that kind of trend rise up whenever there's the war. So the Civil War, we saw a spike in spiritualism. During the First World War, we see a spike in spiritualism because people want to be able to connect.
And spiritualism, I mean, there different religious movements came out of it. Christian Scientists, which is a mainstream religion. They've got a paper and the whole thing. That's a hop and a skip away from the spiritualists. And I think that part of the spiritualist credo was there was this was a time, and Albert will talk to you a lot about it, but this is a time where we had different sort of technological advances, whether it's the light bulb and electricity or radio waves or what have you. And so there was a very much a philosophy of science interwoven with spiritualist beliefs. And so you see that throughout. I mean, this idea of scientific experimentation. The spiritualist church exists today. I mean, we have some very, very good friends of ours who are at the spiritualist church in Austin, and we are always doing events there. It's a great church. But part of their credo of the church, if you go to any of their services, is that if you read their credo before any of their services, it says something to the effect that it's been proven scientifically that we believe it's been proven scientifically that the afterlife exists, and you can prove it through science. And it's part of their religious credo, which is an interesting thing. You see it in their hymnals or whatever.
Yeah.
Oh. Yeah. So you talked about belief, and I'm interested in this whole idea of consciousness, right? Doctors don't know where it comes from. They assume it comes from a brain or it's a product of the brain. And when we pass, the brain shuts down and consciousness goes out. In like theology, it goes somewhere. But in this stuff, when you're doing a seance or you're speaking with a ghost, it has like an intelligence. It knows things. Is that the same consciousness, in your opinion, that's existing? Or is it like some type of energy that's like residual energy because the other thing is like, you hear stories about ghosts and there'll be like a lore, like, oh, this ghost says something. He says the same thing, like, I'm looking for something. And it's like, oh, and then that legend becomes that ghost is always looking for something. So, is it an intelligence?
This is where Jake and I philosophically
so we are
create our divide.
We are the best of friends, and we have been friends for a long time. But I think that our world outlook right here, you're just pressing the pressure point about what's happening there at this point.
You hit my soft spot.
You hit the soft spot. So Albert is very much he's very much a materialist, and I'll let him speak for himself. I think that we have slightly different worldviews about that very question.
Yeah, I'm very much a skeptic, and I'm very interested in this realm and what we do from the perspective of how and why we believe, and what do we experience when we experience supernatural, and how do we experience it, and how do we interpret those things. And so, as Jake said, I'm very much a materialist, in that I think that our consciousness is a byproduct of our body, right? And that it is not something entirely outside of us. And I know that there's that mind-body problem, and the idea that if the consciousness is outside of us, then we can influence things with our consciousness, right? This is really the basis of psi, right? Of telekinesis and clairvoyance, where I can connect my consciousness to your consciousness, and we can read minds, right? And I'm of the mind of we can't, right? I'm of the idea that we really can't do those things and we're limited. And I think that's where, you can tie in some of the ideas of the spiritualist idea is that there are different planes. It's almost, this isn't unique to spiritualists. This has been going on for a while. The idea of there's different realms. So Dante has, in the Inferno, we know about hell, but he also has paradise, right? Paradiso.
Yeah.
There are different planets, and on the different planets, the different people reside. And Swedenborg is a philosopher who kind of helps to set the stage also for spiritualism. And Andrew Jackson Davis, who is the philosopher of spiritualism, who appears before the Fox sisters. So he's really kind of the first of them. And he sets up this like realm of higher beings, right? And that when we pass, we go into this realm. Our spirit body goes into this realm, and then we can move up as we become more enlightened. And so I think that's a really fascinating. That's what really the spiritualists were saying is, there's this other realm out there, and we can connect to that realm because it's right there. But Jake is of a different mind, and this is where we have long arguments sometimes.
Long arguments driving home from our session. Yeah, so I think that again, I would not put words in Albert's mouth, but I think he would agree that he's sort of more of a materialist than I am. I'm something of a substance dualist, and so my thought is that what we know scientifically. I'm complete, and again, this gets to the point of arguments that we've had. But I believe in science. Full stop. Full stop. So, what I also believe, though, is that the possibility of transcendence, which almost definitionally transcends science, and that so that allows for the possibility of a lot of things, and it allows for the possibility of consciousness, outside our physical bodies. It allows for a lot of different possibilities. I think that it's very difficult, perhaps impossible, to prove it in any such a way that would be satisfactory to anybody other than the person experiencing it personally. I think that a lot of what happens in our seances are ultimately they're subjective experiences.
Okay.
And
so, a person may sense something, may feel something, they may sense, what they perceive to be a spirit, who knows what it is. And then the question then becomes, what's the origin of that sensation?
Yeah.
And at least in my worldview, some possibility suggests that it may be something that we can't explain through objective scientific principles. Now, I think Albert probably vehemently disagree with all that, but I think that there is, at least I'm what you would call epistemologically humble with regards to, what we know, what can be known, just because of philosophically, I think there's limits to what science can explain because of the distinction between sort of our objective world and our subjective experience of it.
But I think the one thing that we do kind of agree on is the genuineness of the experience that the individual is having, and then I think we both are curious as to what is the meaning of that experience, right? And I think that's something that makes me the most fascinated in this area. And it's always been my fascination is why do we experience it? How do we experience it? Right?
Yeah.
Because it is profound. It's throughout our history. We have, occult stuff occurring all the time, supernatural things occurring all the time, and we continue to do so. So it is, I think it would be really poor form of me to sweep all that away and say this has no meaning, right? There's nothing here, and that these are all lunatics and like madmen, right? But I think that is a very poor and incurious approach. And I think that to go out there and say, like, this is a real experience. You had an experience. What does that experience mean to you? Why is it profound? What does it mean? What does it mean to our society? It's just almost like monster theory. We tell stories about monsters because they reflect our anxiety of society, right?
Right.
Well, what are these stories about the supernatural reflect about us? Because ghosts change throughout time, right? And I don't know if you know the thing about photography. Before photography, oftentimes spirits and ghosts are described as real as you and I, right?
Yeah.
And then the advent of photography, Mumler and all these guys are doing double exposure kind of stuff. They become transparent. In movies, they become transparent. So now ghosts are transparent, And so even our idea of it kind of changes over time. And I think that's also really fascinating.
Yeah. You, this whole thing about science, about being able to prove, in your experience in doing this, have you seen anything like provable, something that you could, like the ectoplasm or the automatic writing?
I would say we've had a lot of very mysterious, there's mysterious things. And I think that there's a room, even in skepticism, for the unexplained. But there's been some very mysterious and strange events and things that our sitters have experienced that have been strange and inexplicable.
Yeah, we've heard, we've done hundreds of these sessions, and, we are still surprised on occasion about some of the stuff that happened in the room. A few years back, we were doing a session in Austin, and a really strange, weird rumbling noise sort of emerged, I guess, from the floor, from the room. I couldn't tell where.
Yeah, it felt like it was in the middle of the room. It was so we do. So Jake and I we've done hundreds upon hundreds of these, so we're very used to it. It's like the analogy when I was, is it like, we're walking. If we're pest control people, we're walking in the room. We're like, yeah, okay, that's a rat over there. That's a roach. Okay, let's go deal with it, right? And we're just kind of, that's what it is, right? We could see it, we do it, and so sometimes we are very
surprised every now and then,
unaffected by some of the things that are occurring because they're just. Yeah, this is what happens, right? Like this, I've seen this 100 times. Like a doctor's not going to be like, "Oh my God, that's blood," and they pass out, right? They've seen blood 100 times, and not. So so Jake and I are doing we're doing the session. We're doing the guided meditation. We come out of the guided meditation, and we're asking for a sign from the spirits, and we're sitting there like, spirits, if you're here, let us know of your presence. And there's just like this like boom that's just in the middle, kind of feels in the middle of the room. Jake is on one side, I'm on the other, and it kind of, you could feel it in your chest. It's boom, like this like low kind of vibration.
It was very creepy.
And I just stop and I just stare at Jake, and Jake just stares at me.
And we're like, what the
and we're not, because we don't want to influence the experience of the individuals. Like everybody's having their experience, and we don't want to be like, look at that and look at that and look at that. It's, what is it that you're sensing? We want you to be able to like be in control of what you're feeling. And so I look at Jake, we're both like wide-eyed, and we look around the room and everybody's just like, just waiting for like something to happen.
But it was something,
and it's like, that's the moment,
that was
right there, right? I think oftentimes when we think about and this is one thing that I think is really about the call and reply, is when we think about communication with the supernatural, we oftentimes think about it the way it's done in movies, right? Like stuff flying across the room and doors slamming shut and closed. And oftentimes it's the really subtle, small things that we are not in tune to that are the things that are going to be the most significant. And the one things that people go, and oftentimes they're in the mundane moments of our lives. Just like I was sitting there, I was combing my hair, and that's when I heard my grandmother's voice, and I knew she passed. Right. So we get a lot of those stories. It's never in the middle of the dance club,
right?
That this happened, and so that moment, like this really subtle, small moment where we are now having the experience,
ourselves.
Everybody else is kind of oblivious to that.
Yeah. The other thing is that a lot of our sessions are. In format similar to the Fox Sister sessions, in that they're call reply, as Albert explained. We're not dealing with docs generally, although that is in the realm of possibility. We've had that sort of thing, but there are different devices that we put out, and that we're hopeful during a successful session that we'll call it letters and numbers, and we'll hope that we'll get some response.
Yeah,
we are not. Neither one of us claim to be mediums. We're not physical mediums. We make a big point of that during our sessions, and so we talk about sort of the energy being with the sitters themselves. We put these devices out, we start asking questions, and sometimes we'll get a series of letters and numbers. These series of letters and numbers will sometimes be significant to someone in the room. Sometimes they're not obviously significant. The significance will appear to someone later on. That's it happens frequently. On occasion, we've had things that were right on the nose, which were quite startling. And, we can debate, Albert and I can debate all day long about these devices that we lay out. Maybe there's some scientific principles, and that, something going on that's making these devices react in the way they do.
Yeah.
We're not controlling them. I give you my word. But there may be, something going on scientifically. But even if you accept all that, there's some randomness involved. And we have had some odd occasions where the response was completely on the nose, which even if it's random, it's hard for me personally to explain that through coincidence.
Yeah.
We had a session. I won't get into the details too much because we don't like to get into the sessions too much because they're very personal, but we had a session that maybe 4 or 5 people were in the room. 4 people, I think. And we got a series of letters. And one of the women in the room.
It was a lot of letters. Like,
it was a lot of letters.
Very, very just like they're alphabet letters, but they didn't
make any sense to anybody.
They didn't make any sense. They wasn't like, like jar, JAR, and like that. It was
it was just random. It was, I'll just go ahead and tell you. So it was ILYMQ. ILYMQ. Meaningless to me. Meaningless to any of us. Woman got up in the room, fled the room weeping, crying.
Huh.
And so
after the session.
Yeah. And so Albert went and spoke to her a little bit, and we spoke to her a little bit. Her fiance had passed away the year previously, and her fiance used to text her on her phone, not long messages, he would text her initials, and the initials were ILYMQ, which stood for I love you, my queen.
Oh, wow.
And so we got that one night in a session. And so it's hard for me to, when we have experiences like that, and we've had other experiences like that, which were completely on the nose. And so I find those sorts of experiences significant. Again, if you're a materialist, if you're a skeptic, you can, God bless you, you can find some explanation for that, but I personally found it quite powerful.
Yeah. Yeah, I had this medium that I was speaking with on the podcast, and that was one thing she said. She said, when I do mediumship, I'm not asking them anything, and I don't know what it means, but the person I'm helping knows what it means.
Yeah, and so we get a lot of that as well.
Yeah,
and we during our sessions, we are just opening up a line. We're not, you'll see these kind of cheesy magic shows where they're having a Houdini seance or something, or Jack the Ripper seance or something like that. There's none of that. We are just opening a line, and we're just hoping that we get some sort of contact and see what comes through. We are, and again, we stress that we're facilitators, not mediums. But I personally believe that we all have an intuitive and somewhat mediumistic nature to a lesser or greater degree.
Yeah.
And so if you put together a group of 20 to 25 people, and at least they speak up, invariably you'll find someone in the room who is really tapped into something that's going on. And, so during our sessions, we try to put the energy not from us, but with our sitters themselves. And so we really lean into our sitters to help us sort of verify whatever it is that goes on in the room.
And that's a big part. I think that's a big part of the experience, the communal experience that is the seance, and the communal experience that is any of these kind of psychic kind of sessions, right?
Yeah.
It's not about me, it's about you as the individual who's having this. And if there's a message that's there for you, that's for you. That's not for me. Using, when I do readings of tarot cards, I'm just going to read the cards, right?
Yeah.
Because the cards aren't going to lie. I can lie. You can lie. We all can lie about what the cards mean. And I can think this is what you want to hear, but that's not for me to interject. It's the cards, right? And so in the same sense with the seance stuff, when Jake and I put the devices out and we're kind of showing people how to commune, it's so that they can have that experience. And a big part is so they can continue. You can leave our seance and go do this at home, and you'll go, I'm getting the same kind of stuff. It's not, like this only happens here because it's not medium-led. It's not based upon the energy that's flowing through the individual. It's based upon us as a community kind of engaging in this activity.
So if the extent it's medium-led, the entire room becomes a medium, right? I mean, the energy is with our sitters themselves. And so, and our sitters they'll have names will come to them or sensations, and we really encourage people to speak up during the course of a session, because invariably, often it'll be the case. It's like, a name will come to someone, and then someone else in the room was like, yeah, that name was coming to me as well. Right. And so that to me is a verification of some sort that
And there's people that I think one of the fascinating things is we have people that will come in and will say, who here is an intuitive? And people raise their hands who kind of feel like you might be intuitive. Maybe like a half a hand kind of comes up. But then, in these sessions, we will have people that they will have these experiences and they'll go, I felt like I opened something up inside of me. And they say, like, I'm getting this name. Like they didn't feel like they're intuitive. They're like, I got this name. Does this mean something to somebody here, right? Or they'll have other experiences. I remember a session where we had a guy that was very... we allow people talking and asking questions, right? It's a communal thing, but this guy kind of was interrupting a whole lot and just kind of like questioning things, like, this is whatever, I don't believe in any of this, and kind of really just loud about it. And then we go into the session and he has a full-on panic attack, and he just is like having this very visceral experience that he was not expecting to have, and fled the room. And I had to go out there and talk to him to see if he was like calm him and bring him back and do like a nice regulated space for him to come back in. And for him, it was a very profound, experience. So there's always that avenue. And that's where we really try to do is create that space for you to be able to explore it. And a lot of the people that come to our sessions are people that aren't fully, ingrained in it, in the supernatural or the occult. They're really people that may be curious about it. They may be like have kind of an interest, or maybe they're, they have a crystal or two at their house, but they're not going to talk to their friends about this stuff, right? And then they come and they get to have these experiences, and they get to bring their friends. In the tradition of the spiritualism movement and the seances, when they occurred in the 1800s, there was a very much acceptance of skeptics to be brought, right? It was that like, this isn't, again, they wanted to be scientifically proven. They wanted to be shown that this is the real deal. And so there wasn't that shying away, and there was an allowing of that. And they oftentimes had space set just for those who wanted to learn about it. In some private settings, private circles that would be held.
Yeah, that's pretty interesting, because this whole idea about belief, when they approach this, they approaching it as a novelty, as entertainment. But if they're so closed off, they're still able to have an experience.
Yeah, I mean, we've seen people that come in, and it's one of those jokes of like, all right, who's here and who was told to be here, right? So we get husbands and girlfriends and wives and everybody, partners that are there, and they're just cross-armed, and they're there because their partner's there. And we've had, we did the Via Finale one year. I don't know if you remember that guy who, he's like, I'm just here because my wife wants to be here. And he was very gruff and just like closed off. And by the end of it, he was fully into the experience. And that's a big part. I mean, I think that's, like I said, like I'm a skeptic, and I think that there's a healthy amount of spiritualists that were very much of like, we need to root out the fraud. We need to root out like this. We need to have that scientific evidence, and we're not going to accept anything of that, and still maintain the faith of spiritualism, right?
Yeah.
And you need to have that experience. It's easy to be on the outside and be like, it's whatever. But the moment you have that experience, you get to realize this is a much more complex, more subtle kind of event. And then when you open yourself up to that, there's a lot of other things you're willing to open yourself up to, and to have those experiences. And then you get to judge, what does it mean for you, right?
Right.
And we get a lot of that, and we invite it.
Yeah, and I think that the part of, I guess, our philosophy, like I've mentioned, I started out with, is that we look at this as sort of in the same spirit as parlor games, and so we encourage, if people come in and they don't believe, or they're skeptics or whatever, it's our hope that and I think we're usually successful, is that they have a good time, and so they'll come, and it's an interesting evening. It was weird for them. We always joke that people say, can we bring drinks in? It's like, yeah, it makes it better.
Spirits, we got spirits.
Spirits, we got better. So yeah, sure, have a drink. So if you're going to, like, what better way to, have a couple of cocktails while, during a seance? I mean, that seems like super fun, even if you're not a believer, right?
Right. So,
and so I think that so for skeptics, depending on what kind of, how people approach it, and whether, whether we don't, we're not taking advantage of people. We're, up front, and we don't try not to charge too much money. And so, so people enjoy it, so they should enjoy it like they'd enjoy, maybe just any sort of presentation.
And I think it's a big part is we're not asking you to accept anything. We're just asking you to have an open open yourself up to an experience. And I think that's the big part. And to answer kind of like your question, where is this in this realm? Is it entertainment? Is it like educational? Is it experiential? Is it like, I think it's all of the above. And that also follows the history of spiritualism. The act of the seance, with the exception of private circles, was a thing that in the Victorian times, they would go like, hey, well, let's open up the newspaper. What's going on tonight? Oh, well, there's 3 different seances. Which one should we get tickets to? Right. And so they would go to these special sessions, and the spiritualists weren't having seances regularly. These, again, were like special kind of events. They would have their circles, and they would have their other things, their services and these groups, but it wasn't that experience. And so people would go out and they would have these they would choose which of the 3 they'd want to go see, right. Or be a part of. And so I think that's part of that history as well, is that there is this component of it. But it also made sense also why they did it, because to grow your congregation, you need converts or you need babies, right? And so let's go out and try to find the converts. And so we want to open this up into a space where people can consume it. And then again, as Jake and I kind of mentioned earlier, the other part that I think is the most fascinating is Jake talks about like sleepover games or parlor games, right? Is that this is a time in America where we have that rise of the middle class. We have a leisure class. We have people that can spend time to do things. We have these growing sciences. We have phrenology. We have mesmerism, which is hypnosis or trance. We have electricity coming in, electromagnetism, so magnets. These are all things that we can witness in our home, and they become part of these games that we can like explore. And so there are parlor games that were built around creating static electricity and the joys of doing that. There are parlor games that were built around spirit communication. There are parlor games built around mesmerism, and so people were able to kind of enjoy these things and decide. And oftentimes they did these, they called them, they were experiments. They would do these experiments in their home on how to commune with the dead. And so we get like the talking board is an example of that, or table turning, where everybody put their hands on the table and the table would begin to move. People had whole dinner parties get it. There was pamphlets that were published on how to have a table turning session at your home. Wow. And so people can engage in it. And there was a debate. Was this mesmerism? Was this animal magnetism that was causing it? Was this spiritualism? Was this the spirit speaking through us through electrical forces? Or was this the idiometer effect that Michael Faraday was talking about? Or, as the clergy, was this the devil? Right? Mm-hmm. It's the devil that's causing the tables to move. But people would have gatherings in their own homes, and they would, put their hands on the table, and then it would start moving. And then they go, okay, let's try it this way. Instead of the guys on one side and women on the other, let's have man, woman, man, woman. Okay, let's just have 2 women on there. Okay, let's have somebody stand on the table and it'll do it. Let's try the furniture and this like table turning stuff where putting their hands, kind of laying the hands on things. It's so crazy that they have like instructions on how to do it to a person. Put your hands on his shoulders, his chest, and then the person will start vibrating and moving. And so there's a lot of fun that's in it. And when we see in pulp culture now the seance, or even like the psychic, right? It's always like a scary movie or something dark happened, someone's getting possessed. And none of these were like that. Spiritualists had their own Sunday school. And in their Sunday school, small children gathered around and did this. The act of the seance was a communal experience. It was oftentimes very uplifting and very inviting, and something that it kind of knit that community together.
Huh. It could be fun. It was fun. So one thing that we try to do, we will on occasion, we conduct public seances and private ones as well. But one line that we don't cross is that we don't traffic in grief, and which seems a weird thing when you're involved in the business that we're involved with. But on occasion, someone will lost a loved one or a spouse or something, and they will want us to come and make direct contact. And we don't do that because we try to adhere to sort of Victorian idea of at least the parlor game part of it. I know that the Civil War widows were probably, and Abraham Lincoln and his wife were probably, came to spiritualism through grief. But to a large degree, we, to the extent we can, we try to pursue sort of a more of an entertaining and fun experience. And so, people will get emotional on occasion during our sessions, but we don't set forth to, we don't set forth to do that because we really want to sort of adhere to that sort of the playfulness of a lot of the Victorians. And, Albert's talking about these table turning sessions, and they're doing all these different experiments. I mean, I'm thinking as he's talking about that, about like, what a fun time. I mean, I can imagine having my friends over to my house and say, bring 10 people over. We're going to get our Ouija boards out. We're going to play with, push tables around.
Yeah.
It's going to be super fun. And, I'll be making drinks, and we'll have fondue or whatever it is that they, whatever, it'll be fun.
Yeah. And part of the objective of our seance, our public kind of facing seances, are really giving you the tools that you can do. Again, we want it where you go home, you open up your junk drawer, you go to your cabinets in your closets, and you find those items, and then you can continue. So one of the things that it kind of limits us, and where we won't deal with grief. Like, we're not going to try to contact your great aunt Tess because you're grieving over that. But here are the tools, and if you want to go and do this on your own, that's for you, right? That's your own private conversation. It's not a party line where we all get to hear you have your conversation with your great aunt Tess. These are the tools to help you make that connection, and then you can go and try it yourself. And there is that. And that gets to this territory of, is this dangerous? Right?
That was going to be my next.
Yeah,
thing.
is this dangerous? Well, there's a couple things that I would talk about so one of them, prayer protections. That's big now, right? Having prayer protections. That was not part of the spiritualist ideas in the very beginning, right? Because I'm not speaking to the devil, I'm speaking to loved ones. I'm speaking to those who've passed on, right? Now, there's things called dayakas, which are these lower trickster kind of entities, but they're not causing harm. And there's no real seance literature that's like devils were showing up and people are now possessed and they're doing all kinds of crazy things. That's really something that came from the 70s and 80s, Rosemary's Baby and the Exorcist, right?
And all that.
If we even think about like the talking board, it was in 1967 that the Ouija board outsold every other game board. Like, it was almost 2 million copies. Where are all the possessed children? Yeah. Right? Where's all that possessed literature? And I think it's great to have that fascination of, like, my uncle's cousin's roommate's best friend played with the Ouija board and did this. And we all have those stories. It's a great story, but I think it is all really less dangerous. Like I said, children were doing seances. But I also feel like it is the intention that you put in. If you are somebody full of anxiety and you go into a situation like this, or you're playing with a talking board, you will get anxiety back. If you put fear out there, you get fear. We all have that friend that's always down on their luck. Oh God, this happened to me today. And you're like, well, there's a lot of good things that happen, but it's that reflection on just those one things. And so we don't do. Now, if people want to do a prayer protection, they're more than welcome to. But it's not typically part of that. It doesn't show up till much later. In fact, it doesn't show up till like the 1930s. Do we start to see any inkling of like a prayer kind of protection that is being done? But before that, we
see a lot in our community that, a community such as exists, that kind of the whole spiritualist community is sort of an old-fashioned community, and much more modern are kind of the Wiccans and this sort of, and we're kind of adjacent to that sort of movement. And I think I saw there's an article in the New York Times recently about how witches were having their moment, because I think that
there's on the rise,
on the rise, because there's a lot of Wiccan practices out there. And so we have noticed just with what we do that there's a lot of crossover, and a lot of people from that tradition, I guess it's a tradition, are interested in what we're doing. And so there's an interplay between practices. We see these different incenses and different. We had an article in our quarterly journal a couple months back about different herbal mixtures and stuff that you can use for spirit protection during a seance. And that's not really part of the historical tradition. You don't find that in the historical literature, but you do see it like with the rise of Wiccan practices, and as it mixed with seance practice, spiritualist practices, you'll see a lot of that crossover. And, we're cool with it. I mean, so we'll, depending on the kind of session that we have, sometimes we'll do seances for a lot of Wiccans, and someone will, especially with Ouija boards, people are really anxious about Ouija boards. So we'll often ask for someone wants a protection prayer or something, and we'll get one of the Wiccans to do that for us, or we may try to do it ourselves. But it's a thing for sure. There's a woman we're quite fond of who leads a spiritualist church there in Austin. And I asked her this very question about, like, people think the Ouija board, is dangerous.
Yeah.
And I think her line was like, just like screw him or something.
No, her line was like, then don't, if you feel that way, don't play with it.
Don't play with it. I mean,
if if you can't handle it, don't play with it.
Yeah, she was very dismissive. She was very dismissive. It's like, it's fine.
Yeah.
You know, it's fine. I mean, we've had weird experiences. We've never had anything that I never felt unsafe. I mean, I've had a few experiences which I thought were odd, not necessarily the Ouija board, but I never felt unsafe in any way. There are exceptions to everything. There was an historical account from California from the 1930s. Was that the El?
Yeah, we'll get into a fight about this one.
Yeah.
The El Cerrito.
The El Cerrito incident. So that was a famous incident involving the Ouija boards where a bunch of people were holed up at a house.
Yeah, they had lost a family member, and then they went into a house and
just kind of lost their mind.
They were the Ouija board for
days. Days, and they kind of lost their mind, and somebody got kidnapped, and the police were called out, and
that was like a series of incidents that were not related to the incident. Like, it's kind of like one of those.
It just kind of escalated.
Yeah,
right?
because there was a police officer that was found like naked wandering with a gun, and then
this was about like 30 miles away, and he was at the same time.
Yeah,
and he was saying that he was going to go kill this demon that had been a murder. And so it was a crazy kind of incident that was in the newspapers. And but that's, I don't know what to make of that. That seems to be an outlier. Other than that, I've never heard of anything in documented where this will be famous last words. I need to go look it up. But I haven't seen anything documented where some people were seriously affected in a negative way by playing with a Ouija board. I mean, you see a lot of stuff on Reddit or something, but
like The Exorcist or Amityville Horror. So I mean, like, opening that door, right? Would you say that those spirits are like they're like misinterpreting that, like they're getting them confused, like, oh, that's a demon, or are these just ghosts, like people that carry over their same attitude and same things to the afterlife and are.
Yeah, I mean, that's the idea, is that like the spirits, when they pass, we're still the same consciousness, and we're still the same personality. We're just in a different realm, and that is the spirit world, right? Yeah. And then we can continue to move up the planes, right? We can continue to go to the higher realms the more that we kind of enlighten ourselves, and then we become like higher and higher kind of beings. And that's kind of the idea. Yeah. And so I think when we connect, so the first thing is, how are we interpreting, what's the lens that we're interpreting in this situation, right? There's this thing in sociology called situational set. And situational set basically says, like, sometimes things like the environment impacts us. So, for example, it is against the rules in professional sports to paint a locker room pink. Because they were doing that, and they found that was decreasing the play of the other team, right? So they can no longer do that. But a better example of situational set is when you walk down a dark alley at night, you don't go, oh, I wonder, this is going to be fun, exciting. You're kind of like, where's the danger? Where's the danger? Where's the danger, right? And there may be no danger, but that environment has set your brain to have that kind of response, right? And so sometimes when we sit down and we see people, like, they go with the Ouija board and they see it and they just, no, I can't. And they start freaking out. So now they're kind of putting that into the board rather than having like this kind of objective experience and allowing them. And we find that some people come in kind of terrified, then they get and play with the board and they go, oh, this isn't so bad, right? And they're nice and relaxed. We know the talking board. So Jake talked about this earlier about people freaked out too, but we know of occult shops that don't carry the board. They have human bones. Yeah. Tons of them, right? They have all kinds of other things that seem a little like on the edge, but they don't carry the board because there are customers that get too upset about seeing the board.
And and what I find to be fascinating too is that we will have, sometimes, our clients will hire us to do a seance with a workshop.
Right.
And so we'll have a workshop on the Ouija board, and then we'll have the seance afterwards. And we'll have lots of people that come to the seance, but they will not go to the workshop, which I was like, dude, man, I mean, if you're, what I don't really understand, like, why you would think the Ouija board was going to be any scarier than the seance. I mean, if anything, it would be the opposite. But
But I think that, I mean, that stigma, I
The
think the
stigma's-
stigma with the board helps to influence how we experience it. And I think that's a big part,
okay.
you know, and that's, I think is what I'm trying to translate that just the way we do it. Even with our seance, when we do our seances, people come in and there's this great expectation as to what's going to happen because of what they see on social and like, in media all over the place. Right. And so we have to tamper it down and say, look, this is going to be subtle and this is going to be quiet. Think about your own experience. And that's the big kind of, thing that we look at is what's your own experience? Never in the middle of a dance floor, right? You're not sitting in the middle of the dance floor and then your grandma's like, hey, what's up? Let's talk, right? It's in those mundane moments. I'm falling asleep. I'm reading a book. I hear my name being called out, right? It's I'm gauging in something where I'm in my internal world or the world around me is quiet. And now
this
I sense that, right?
So
Right.
they kind of come out of, they emerge.
You're sitting there and you go, I wonder how my friend Brian's doing, and the phone rings, right? It's in those moments that we really, I think we connect and we can pick up those things that we see as special and as signs of the supernatural.
So an experience that creates a belief and it's solidified by the experience.
Cognitive dissonance, that's what that is. You have an event and you have to interpret the event, and either your belief changes or your actions change. Yeah.
So the seance setup, what is like dimming the lights, the candles, all that was to set the mood so that they would believe that, or they would get in the
Kinda get there into their
It kind
headspace,
of helps
right?
to get you there, right? It helps to create, I think it helps to create a calm environment is the main thing. So there are different kinds of seances. So that's the first part. There are light seances where it's just, we did it like this. This is oftentimes in the very beginning, 1848, 1849, when, you know, the Fox sisters show up at the Corinthian Hall. They're not turning on down the lights. It's a theater setting in a lecture hall, and they're sitting there, and they're doing them just kind of in the lighting that we are in now, right? And then we start to see some changes that start to occur. In about 1852, out in Athens County, Ohio, we have the Coons family, and they present the first blackout seance, and that's where you're in a room, and the whole entire room is
pitch
blackout,
dark.
right? But then we also see mediums that are doing things where they're taking silks, red silks and paper, and putting that over lanterns to make the room where it's still visible, but it's a red light.
So it's kind of a red light seance.
Yeah. Some are just dimming the lights. And so a lot of it, I think, is really trying to create the environment to be able to be relaxed and to be in a place where you can experience these things. Again, if we turn up the music and we've got all kinds of things going, you're so overloaded that you're not going to be able to connect, right? If you think about psychic experience, so the Gansfield experiment, right? Like that's where you sit in a room and you have these goggles on, you got lights, and what they're trying to do is sensory deprivation, right? They're trying to remove all the distractions so that you're in a place where you can have a psi experience. So that's kind of very the same thing. We are reducing the amount of stimuli so that we're nice and we're calm and relaxed, and then we're able to engage in the activity that we're doing.
We, as an aside, I mean, well, again, we've been doing this for a long time, and we've the Austin Séance, which we make up, is something of an experimental endeavor, and so we've played with all of these different formulas. And so we've kind of fiddled with red light seances, and we fiddled with our seances. Typically, right now, are usually dimly lit, candle lit. We're going to have a session actually this evening, which will probably be a combination of probably red light and candles, I'm guessing. But we try different things. I've personally done some blackout seances at my house, which are weird. And we've also done seances fully lit. I typically, to be honest, I find those less effective. But we on occasion, because of circumstances, we will have a seance in a session just like this, where it's just totally bright. And we've done that 2 or 3 times. And I just think that
In a karaoke room, yeah.
a karaoke room, I think people expect a certain sort of atmospherics. And I think that you can have an experience in a fully lit room, but I think your senses are turned too far up when everything's lit and you kind of see everything. And so I think that, usually it's the lights and the candles to set that mood to bring you there, I think is very effective. But you can do them all sorts of different ways.
You talk about this, like dimensions, other dimensions. Like recently, like it's becoming more like proven, like acceptable. Like, yeah, there are higher dimensions. So, are you seeing that like in your experience, I don't know, but like when we pass it, and like, are we existing like on like a fourth dimension? Because my biggest thing is like, how come a lot of people can't see them, but some people see them, or some people are having these experiences?
I'll let Jake answer that one.
Yeah. So I'll just dive in as much as we're going to dive in. I think my answer is going to be very unsatisfying. And I think that if you asked Albert, it would be even less satisfying. I really think that these sorts of questions are, I personally, I think I mentioned before, my personal belief is that there's room for the existence of everything that you've just described. But why we can't see him, who can't see him, who sees him, all that, those are questions that might be left to someone who claims to be a medium. I can just say from personal experiences that I've experienced things which I felt were some indication of suggestive, proof is perhaps too strong a word, but suggestive of the existence of things outside the realm, of this world or existence of the paranormal. I mean, I think all of us have experienced things like that. But I have to say that my personal view is that it's a very tricky matter to be able to sort of prove those experiences in any sort of scientific way that would be satisfactory to a wide range of scientists. Yeah. I think that a lot of those experiences are purely subjective. And I think that, and so if you have a medium that you have faith in that says that they sense these things and they have a sense of the world, then you can choose to believe them or not. But I think that if you kind of go down this road, I think it can be frustrating to get sort of the scientific certainty that you're looking for. And so I'm somewhat, I'm open to the phenomena, but I'm somewhat evasive about the ability to sort of prove any of it. And maybe that's somewhere where Albert and I agree. I'm not sure, but I think he probably feels more strongly about it than I do.
Yeah, I mean, I think so. There's a lot of different arguments on why some people can't, and in the psi world, right? So if we look at the mind-body problem. If the consciousness is separate from the body, then it's the consciousness that's perceiving it, right? And then it's providing that information to our brain, and to our senses. And so I can see that, right? Like I'm able to connect again. If our consciousness is a nebulous thing that's kind of around me, remote viewing, then I can send my consciousness somewhere else. And so there are training manuals on how to do that, right? The military wrote a whole training manual. It wasn't very successful, but they wrote a whole training manual on that. And we see that. We see, different kind of experiments that are dealing with the same thing. We see there's brain experiments dealing with people that go into deep meditation, nuns and Buddhist monks that go into deep meditation, and how different centers of the brain turn off, and then we're really kind of in the back of our brain kind of processing stuff. So there's some ideas that there are parts of our brain, which we know our neurology is a very new field in the world of science, right? So we're still really kind of learning the biology of the brain and what it can and can't do. We're learning all about our different kind of waves that are going on there. And so there's that, right? So as we discover that, maybe we discover something that we yet know, what's unknown to science. And once we find that, we'll have like more of an understanding of why people are sensing these things and why people aren't, right? There are parts of the brain, we can get into the science and the neurology of the brain and like how people can sense, our senses, how we have different senses, sometimes they get all messed up. What I find fascinating from like an anthropological or sociological perspective is the evolution of the supernatural. Karen Armstrong, The History of God, it's a great book, and it talks about like kind of the evolution of God through society. And I think that her layout, and I'm going to mess this up, but I think the way that she kind of her idea on it, I think is really aligns very much with kind of the supernatural so her idea is like in the very beginning, God is animistic. It's in everything. The wind, the sun going across the sky, everything, right? There are gods in everything. And then we begin to understand the patterns of the sun, and we begin to understand that. We go, oh, there's no gods in that. It's just the way it moves, right? So then where are the gods? Oh, they are at the top of the mountain. So then we begin to become curious, and we eventually get to the top of the mountain. We go, oh, there are no gods there. Well, where are the gods? Oh, we're there in the water dome above the sky. So then we start to turn our eyes towards the sky, and we don't see the gods, right? So then where are the gods now? Well, they're in this abstract plane that's just beyond whatever. And as we start to evolve and our understanding of the world evolves around us, God always is one step beyond our grasps, right? And so the analogy that I would say is Bigfoot's always blurry, right? The moment we catch Bigfoot, he's just another creature in the zoo, right?
Yeah.
It's no longer alluring. Think of like there's a lot of cryptids that have been found, right? We're no longer fascinated in those cryptids. It's just, okay, yeah, we found it. Done, right? And so in some sense, the idea where the ghosts have to be is the same thing. Are they here with us on the same plane? Are they on a different plane? Oh, they're in kind of outer space. So like, Dante, they're on different planets, right? Well, we see the planets. There's nobody there. Well, then where are they? Well, they have to be in this abstract place. And we have to do that. And so as our science evolves and understanding, they fill in that space. And I think where we are in the world of quantum theory, that's the space that they fill now, right? This is a quantum thing, and that psychic powers is quantum entanglement, right?
Yeah.
And so we start to fill that with that science. And I think I would, this is a guess, right? And I'm 100% probably wrong. So I'm willing to accept that is once we start to get an understanding of that science, it's, well, now where are the ghosts? Now where's God? Where are these things? They're just beyond that.
See, I think that this is it's interesting.
Yeah.
And because I think that what he is speaking to speaks a little bit to our different viewpoints in the world, because I mentioned before that I'm a believer in science full stop. Yeah. And so quantum physics explain this, or laws of physics, or Einstein physics, whatever it is, neurology, all that. But what I talked about, when the possibility of supernatural, the possibility of the inexplicable, possibility of whatever, kind of resides exactly where he is talking about. But for me, it's definitional. Mm-hmm. It's definitional. It's like, yes, of course, when we're talking about these sorts of activities, we're talking about something that adheres to the transcendent. And the transcendent, by definition, transcends science. So quantum physics can do this, and neurology can do this, and can whatever. But what I'm talking about is something that's outside science. And as definitionally, you'll never get to the point, in my personal view, that any of this will, I mean, you may be able to explain specific phenomena, you may be explaining this and that and the other. I totally agree with that. But, there's a certain level of religious faith that you can come up with you can certainly come up with a reasonable scientific explanation that has to do with your neurons firing or something like that. It's an explanation, but it does not get to the subjective experience of faith. Yeah. It can't. Because, it's the old analogy that I always come back to is that, I can describe to you all day long what I feel like tasting an apple, but until you bite into the apple, you don't know anything. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so that's the analogy that I always go back to, that there is a certain transcendence in our own subjective experience, which science, by definition, definitionally, empiricism, deals with objective facts. And I feel that a lot of these experiences that we're talking about are not objective facts. Mm-hmm. They're subjective experiences. And so that, right in that realm, I find at least some possibility for the transcendent to reside within that realm. Yeah. But I think this gets down to a question of philosophy and what's possible. And you may have a worldview that if it can't be explained in science, then it simply doesn't exist. But that may be true.
But see, and I enjoy it because I think my perspective is I enjoy this march that's occurring, and I think that it's let's say we prove ESP, right? We prove that, and it's without reasonable doubt, right? It no longer becomes an interesting thing. It's just a thing, right? It's like I've proved that we can smell, and you're like, okay. right? And I think that's where it gets fascinating, is when we get to that point. If we get to that point, what happens to this thing that we're all clamoring over to say this is true and this is not true, and we're having these like fierce debates about.
Are you hopeful? Are you hopeful they'll prove ESP?
I mean, if we prove ESP and it becomes a scientific thing, then yeah, that's great. That's amazing, right? Like and this is why I said my skepticism is not that I am I don't want to say that I am my skepticism. And Jake and I joke about this. We are like a Fox and Scully, right? My thing is I have the X-File poster in my garage. I want to believe, and my skepticism comes from I want such profound evidence that it is. That there's no question to it, right? And that's what I think is when I find that information, I go, here it is, and this cannot be doubted. I can move on, right? And so that's where my skepticism comes in. And so if tomorrow they go, look, we found this, and we can repeat it, and not only can we repeat it, we can demonstrate it, consistently with just random individuals on the street. Perfect, right? Okay. But I can tell you that there's a whole bunch of people that be like upset now that it's been proved, that'll go, well, now what do I do? Right? On both sides. Well, I was railing against it or I was supporting it. Okay. All right. It's all all the great conspiracies that we end up finding are true. It's kind of like nobody cares about them anymore. They're kind of like, well, what's the next one that I want to go on to, right? Yeah. And I find that march very fascinating. And it's and again, like my interest is in why, how, and what does it mean for us? And I don't want to take away somebody's experience and somebody's belief, and I want them to have it because I want to have it.
Yeah, I think that in the 19th century, there were some scientists and doctors that were really looking at seances and this to try to understand what happens at that point when we pass, right? Because they want to harness it and bottle it. Because if you can do that, then that's immortality. But there's something that happens when we pass and from here to there that either erases us or we continue to go on and communicate between worlds.
Yeah, and the spirituals would say that you would maintain your intelligence, like you would maintain the knowledge.
Continuity of consciousness.
You would still continue on. And you move forward. Now you may become more enlightened, and we change because that's the idea. Is you continue to change in life, and if you don't, you just stay in the realm that you're in, right? If you decide like I'm good enough here, you're good enough there, and so it gives you that opportunity. And that's I think one of the parts that also was interesting about the faith was that you maybe you weren't the best person here on earth, but once you get to the spirit realm, you can continue to make that progress, and you continue to have that choice to like be a better person. But yeah, no, I think that there's that, and that's where it gets tricky because it is, I almost thought you were going to talk about the Philip experiment for a second when you're talking about seances and people, because that's a whole other thing. But I think that the consciousness, I think it's hard. I think there needs to be settings, and there have been some of these experiments that people have tried to do on their own to prove the afterlife and to prove that consciousnesses exist, and they've been they haven't provided the evidence. The first one that was really controversial was a guy who connected to a medium and said, I'm going to kill myself on this day. And he put his head in an oven, and this is the 1920s, and had a pact with the medium that he was going to contact him and never contacted the medium. Right? We have Harry Houdini, who also kind of did the same thing. He said, if you can, he's the great escapologist, and I'm rolling my eyes at it because it's just whatever, right? He was just I don't know how kind of language we can use on the show, so he's just kind of a jerk. But he's like, I can break through this, and I will, if it can be shown that there's life after death, then I can do it, right? And I kind of feel like he was such a staunch opposer of this whole thing that even if it was, he wouldn't appear. It'd be like he could be sitting right here and be like, I'm not saying hi.
He's a giant ego too.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's
yeah. But that's a great question. What happens? Why is it that we can't make that connection, or why is it when we make that connection it's fuzzy? Why is it that I think those are all great questions.
There was a philosopher, Miguel de Unamuno, who talks about how one of the overarching sort of drives in human existence is the will to live. And moreover, it's like almost like a will to live forever. I think we all, at some level, crave immortality on some level. And I think that sense that we have leads to religious beliefs, leads to spiritualism, leads to all of this, and it is not, and a lot of these beliefs, and I say this without indictment. I mean, if someone else says this, they would be a knock. But a lot of these religious beliefs, the deeply held religious beliefs, spiritualism, whatever, a lot of them are not, they're irrational beliefs. But I think that our faith kind of resides in part of our irrational nature, and I think that kind of speaks to this other things I'm talking about. Is that when you're talking about things that transcend science, it's almost definitionally irrational, and so it's outside of rationality, right?
Right.
And so a lot of our religious beliefs are I'm was raised Catholic, and I still feel a lot of those sorts of ideas, I think, stirring around in myself, and I'll be the first to admit that a lot of the ideas I have will not stand up to rational scrutiny, but I hold on to them nonetheless.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, when you think about like people who've lost limbs, and they talk about phantom limbs, that's kind of like, what is that? Is that just in this vessel that now we've lost this?
That's the mind body, yeah. Yeah. Is it that vessel? I think you're talking the mind body, right? Yeah. I would, as a materialist, I would say, our body is always trying to sense where it is in the world, right? In the spatial world around us. If I gave you a pen, I said, write your name on that piece of paper, you don't need to look at the paper or your hand to write your name. You just know spatially where it is. And when I hand you the pen, you kind of know spatially. You don't have to sit there and go, okay, that's about 2 feet away from me. And if I reach out here, you're not consciously doing that. And so our body's always trying to know where we are. And so we get little kind of hallucinations. You've ever been there where you feel your phone buzz in your pants and you go, oh, and then you realize it's on the table. Yeah. So our brain goes, oh, there's a bit of information that's here, and I think this is what it is. And I think with those phantom limbs and some of those sensations as a result of that, I know I should have a hand here, but I don't know where it is. And so it's trying to connect that. But there would be people who are the consciousness that would say, well, no, that's the consciousness, right? That's your kind of spirit body that is there that's doing that. And I find that fascinating, right? That sounds really cool.
Yeah, so I don't know how much you pay attention to what's going on with disclosure and UFOs, and one of the things that is been kind of like a theme that you're hearing more and more is they're more spiritual creatures or spiritual things. And I read all these documents, and I don't know if they're real or not, but there was one that was interesting that I read that it was an interview, and they were interviewing the creature and trying to understand the science and the technology. Is this technology or is it science? And it couldn't explain it to us, but it was saying it was both. I thought that was interesting because...
What was the context of this interview? I mean, how were they able to communicate with this entity or whatever it was?
Yeah, that's one thing it doesn't describe. It's sort of it's like they're just talking, and it's transcribed or trying
through the medium or something.
Yeah, through some type of telepath.
Yeah,
and it's saying it's both. So you can't tell me how the ship runs. How does it? And you go in and there's no panels or there's no controls. I don't understand. But then it's interesting because you think about the technology that we have right now is external from us, our cell phone, everything is but it seems interesting because we're headed down this path of what they might be describing, this advancement of technology that is not external, but internal, where all those things are possible. Telepathy, ESP.
Yeah, I mean, with the right technology, I think, definitely you can blend those. Was it Arthur C. Clarke said the best that any advanced technology would look like magic to a lesser culture, right? Yeah. And I think that as we evolve, I think that's a great thing. And there's in the spiritual movement, there are trances, there are trance mediums that are connecting to aliens on other planets and other spirit beings on other planets, and so that's not relatively new. That's something that's very much there. And
they had a description with Swedenborg, or someone described life on Mars, which was
there's a lot of people that describe life on Mars or Jupiter.
And this is before we knew what was actually on Mars, right? And so
what I think is fascinating on that, and in the story of I can't really explain it is, man, you tell me how the inside of a cell phone works. Like I kind of got a general idea of it, but I can't tell you what all the parts. I couldn't.
And if someone were to channel me and say, how does your cell phone work? It's like, hell if I know, man. I don't.
What kind of coding does that? I don't
know. Satellites. What's that? I don't know. Something. I'm not sure.
Yeah.
Who knows?
I mean, I think there's space for that. And the trance mediums, there's all kinds of different mediums. So, there's like rapping mediums, there's table mediums, there's test mediums, there's physical mediums. And the trance mediums are the ones I think kind of the early clairvoyance of going into a state where they are receiving messages. And some of them talk about meeting kind of the spiritual things. James Kripal, who's a professor over at Rice University. He has a new book that just came out that talks, it's called Thinking Impossibly. And in it, he describes something very similar that is UFO kind of phenomenon. I may get this wrong because I just in the book, but that we should see that as kind of religious miracles, right? That it's kind of in the same vein as that. And so that's a very interesting book. And I think it kind of goes in that what you're talking about is maybe these are a little bit different than we think. And maybe we need to change the idea and that aliens are not other visitors, but they may be kind of a spiritual, some kind of other spiritual entity or other kind of spiritual kind of place for us to explore.
Dr. Kripal, by the way, has something called the Archives of the Impossible, which a lot of people are unaware of, but he has an archives of that he maintains at Rice. What we're describing here, but over at Rice University, and he's got apparently thousands of different documents involving UFO encounters, various other things that have sort of interesting outliers. Seems very much like your viewers may be familiar with Charles Fort, but it seems very Fortian that the idea of these different phenomena that's been documented, and so he's got an archives there at Rice University, and he's a religious studies professor at Rice University. He's a tenured professor, and I think that one of his missions has been to get sort of the religious studies space, a lot of the religious studies professors, his colleagues, to think about some of these sort of extraordinary experiences in a different way, and that the idea that if you these UFO experiences or spirituous experiences or ghosts or what have you that are kind of in this space that we're talking about that your viewers are interested in are worthy topics of academic study from a religious and cultural perspective, and that it shouldn't be dismissed out of hand as outliers among eccentric people. But it's actually worthy of. I mean, if you're going to I think his point is that if you're going to spend all this time studying, Renaissance era Catholicism, why not spend some time, thinking about these UFO experiences that so many people seem to have shared, right? And so I think it's an interesting idea. Yeah. So,
yeah, it's stuff that science can explain, and it's that's so interesting. Like. Because a lot of people they're not lying about these.
No, right?
things,
No,
right?
absolutely. Yeah. And we had it's another friend of ours, Professor Joseph Laycock from South
Texas State
University, and he's written about exorcisms. He's one of the nation's foremost experts on exorcisms from an academic standpoint. And we asked him. He spoke at one of our seminars that we sponsored, and I asked him about. Kind of these experiences that he found inexplicable, because he's a man of he's a man from academia. He tries to take a neutral position, but he's talked about some of these experiences that he's read about, and he says, "Well, I don't know why they would be lying about it. I mean, it's just weird things that are in the literature, and you can find these things like this, and I don't. There's no real good reason why they'd be lying about it. So you can either take it at face value or just assume that they're lying. But there's a lot of that stuff like that he that you can find in literature.
And I think that's one of those. I think you hinted something that people can get into the argument of like belief in skepticism and the idea that, well, this person has this. If I don't believe in any of this person has this experience. Therefore, they are a liar, right? And I think that that's not really the thing. Is they had this experience. I just can't explain it, right? And they can't explain it. We're just in a place of can't explain it.
Yeah.
You know,
and
I think
Charles Fort, I don't know if you're familiar with Charles Fort. No. He's a famous writer from the 1930s, I guess. I think it was the 30s.
Yeah. Ooh, I think it was earlier than that, but
he wrote a book called
Book of Low.
Book of the Damned.
He wrote Low, Book of the Damned. He wrote several books.
Yeah, and so one of his ideas was that he was kind of an eccentric guy. He would go through, at the time before the internet, he would just go through newspapers, and would find cataloged like a crazy person, all these strange things.
Raining frogs, raining fish, raining blood,
and there's things that were documented.
Yeah.
And he would just say, well, science ignores these because they just are outliers and they don't make sense. And they just figured like, I don't know. We don't know what this is. Yeah. This is just weird. So we're just going to pretend like it didn't happen.
Kind of like the first Ripley's Believe It or Not kind of little cartoon. Yeah. But he just collected all these and he published them. And there's some really, the Book of the Damned and Low is another one.
Yeah. And they're really interesting. So, you know, when you look at it, it's like, oh yeah, these things happened. They're documented. They're weird. He didn't describe, to my knowledge, he wasn't describing any reason for it. He was just documenting like these weird things happened, and we're pretty sure these weird things happened. Don't know what's up with that. Mm-hmm. And there's a lot of that, right?
Yeah.
And I think his point was that a lot of, and I think probably Dr. Krippel's point is the same. Is that there's a lot of this sort of very unusual occurrences that happen that are usually just ignored because they seem like outliers. Mm-hmm. You know, people question maybe the veracity of the witnesses or whatever. They just figured there's got to be, this is super weird. There's got to be some explanation. We'll just assume there is, and we're moving on down the road.
But that's what I like about, like with Charles Fort and your podcast and like all of this realm. It's really this amazing celebration of the unexplained, right? And I find that rewarding and interesting to be a part of, right? Like that there is absolutely this realm of the unknown and that we can explore it. And I think that there is enough space for everybody on that spectrum of belief to be able to explore it in their own kind of way, right? And you decide on yourself. There's, to attribute this back to the movement of spiritualism, it was very big in the 1800s for magicians to hang out in front of the spiritualists kind of like theater, right? Whatever show was going on, hand out flyers about how the spiritualists were frauds, right? But then the spiritualists would go and hang out in front of the magicians ones and hang out stuff and be like, how these guys are like, whatever, and promoting their stuff. And so there's this like symbiotic kind of relationship where they're both benefiting from it and being able to explore that space. And I think that's kind of a little bit of that, is that you can have people across that spectrum that are both going, and what helped, but when I talk about symbiotic benefit, is what it did is promoted the general population, the audience, everybody who's out there to go, well, I'm going to go see for myself, right? I'm going to go to this thing. I'm going to go to the expo thing for the magician, and I'm going to see if that's real. But I'm also going to go to the psychic, and I'm going to make a determination on what I think is there. And I think that's really kind of that healthy conversation that's there and that we can have.
Yeah.
When I think of like the movie Ghost, that old movie with Patrick Swayze.
Oh, I love it. I love it. Yeah, music. Sorry, playing in my head.
He encounters this other like character, and that one's trying to show him how do you move that, and he's explaining, and I'm thinking, like in your experiences, why is it that like only little things can be like fragments, like
moved,
either movements and then things being like responded back or like fragmented. They're not full sentence. Hey, how you doing?
Hey, what's up? Yeah. So the spiritualists, or some of this in this realm, I think that you would say, so early on, the early spiritualists would say that you have to build up teleplasmic, which later on becomes ectoplasm, that this energy or this magnetic or animal magnetism, this energy that electroforce has to build up enough for them to be able to manipulate it. So when ectoplasm comes out, which we all think of the Ghostbusters ectoplasm, but in the beginning it wasn't, they called them teleplasmic rods, that they had to like build that energy up. And then they were able to move them. And some of these early seances, especially on the Coons farm, it wasn't just a small thing. These bands would play. There'd be violins and tambourines and like hands flying around and lights flying around. And now we can get into whether or not these were fraudulent ones and methods and all that stuff. But early in the literature, you see kind of these things that are occurring. But they have since been prohibited from spiritualist practice and encampments. So like
there's an idea of
the physical mediumship or physical manifestations, the creation of them. They're oftentimes not. They're somewhat banned in a lot of camps, like religious, like Lily Dale does not allow them on their premises because it is ripe with fraudulence. And it created essentially an arms race, and so there are people that say the spirituals say there are psychics that are true, these clairvoyants that are real, these people that can connect. However, there has been these entertainers that have come in and they have provided like these great spectacles in the seance room, and the people want to go see that, and so these people who are real have to now engage in this behavior to be able to compete, right? And there's an arms race, and so they just said, let's just get rid of that.
And Albert and I have been doing this for years, and we could tie threads to things, and we could do all sorts of fakey things, right? Yeah. And we have not done that because we are trying to stay true to to the spiritualist mission to the extent that we can. But, I think that we've seen other people doing seances as well and the space. And so we're always very leery about that arms race sort of being sparked again. And so, we've had, like you said, we've had like small objects move in the room, there is in literature, and it's hard to know what to make of it. It's maybe a Fortean kind of experience, or maybe it was fraud, or maybe it was real, but there's plenty in the literature about sort of more dramatic things moving around. One of our favorite mediums, Mina Crandon, we have an article about her in this latest issue of our magazine. I believe in some of her seances she would have a spirit cabinet, and there were witnesses said the spirit cabinet would kind of move down the room, dance, and it was a whole armoire.
No, it wasn't an armoire.
I think I read in one of the books it broke apart.
So she had two cabinets. So one of them was oftentimes in this time in the 1920s, they were room dividers. Like but
I read the rug on top. The actual wooden box broke apart.
But it would have been that wooden cabinet. The other one is she was later on by his name will come to me by another
Bird Carrington. You're talking about a medium.
No. There's another researcher. He has a really funny name, but he comes in right after the whole 1920s Houdini and Scientific American magazine. He comes in when Harvard is experimenting, and he has her in a enclosed glass one, and that's when she has like a kind of a formal box, and it's a glass enclosure that she's doing seances in as her spirit box or spirit cabinet.
Yeah. Well, that one nothing moved.
But then we have like Davenport Brothers, and we have some of those folks that are doing things with like giant actual cabinets that are built, armoires that are kind of moving and doing things. We have,
but I think like the Davenport Brothers, for instance, I think ultimately they were magicians, and they were magicians, and so they were sort of aping a lot of spiritualist practices, and I'm sure their shows are fascinating. Yeah. But they were magicians.
But we have one thing. So we talked about the amazing things are happening. There was an account in an 1863 newspaper, and I have the newspaper of a séance at the White House, in which the table begins to spin, and then it bursts through the ceiling of the I think the east wing of the White House. There's a gaping hole that's there, and it's Lincoln. Mary Todd is not there. She's been admonished by the medium and sent to bed early. So it's Abraham Lincoln and his cabinet members, and all these crazy things are going on in the seance room.
This is an article you've seen.
Yeah. I've got it. It's a fever dream of a thing, and then the table comes back down, and the hole is sealed up. Right?
So this is written by journalists.
Yeah. And so you have these things that are kind of fantastic happening, and there's some people that say, well, at that time in our Earth, the veil was much thinner, right? There's some people that say, well, these are kind of fraudulent things, these or that, and so I think it's up to you on when you read historically, right? Like you read anything historical, you're like, well, what is the understanding? I think that if we take the account, for me, I think the teleplasmic idea or the ectoplasm idea of we have to build up energy, right? To do it, to be able to go and to do something requires that energy to be able to make that item move. And I think that's probably what most people would adhere to today is that, trumpet seances creating a voice box. That was a big crazy thing is trumpet seances like the yell horn when, cheerleaders kind of have. So they would, to create that, they would have to get enough ectoplasmic energy to be able to create a voice box to speak through it. And that's what the spirits would have to do. And so this could be draining not only on the spirit, but also on the medium, because it is the energy of the medium that they are using to create the item. It's almost like poltergeist phenomenon where they say it's a psychic power and that the poltergeist occurs because of the psychic power of the individual or the child, right? Because it's a teenage child that's occurring. It's kind of the same thing. And so when we talk about medium, that's another thing. I'm talking about a whole bunch of stuff here. So sorry, I'm going all over the place because there's a whole lot of layers to this, but the idea of the medium is a passive individual, which things flow through, right? And this is part of the trance medium. So that was real big where women, mediums during the beginning of the spiritual movements would go into trances and they would, call forth different kind of historical figures, and they would get up and pontificate about whatever subject they've learned about the science, the spirit world, and how the world needs to change. So that was a big part of seances for a while, and so that's the same thing. And so from there, the idea is that the physical medium uses their energy to create the ectoplasm and to create these teleplasmic rods that are coming out of them, almost like octopus arms kind of thing, to manipulate. And so your energy is reliant on the energy of that individual. And so that goes into that mind body. It's their consciousness essentially that's moving it. We have people that are pulling like Maria Crandon, there's photos of her having a meat hand and the ectoplasm and those things, and that gets to that arms race. But that's long answer, short, ectoplasm.
Yeah.
And it takes time to build.
As an aside, I went just last week or so, I was at saw a demonstration of mediumistic ectoplasm, which was interesting, just this last week. And so you could actually kind of see, it's not, if you go back and you look at the historical photos, it's like over the top. I don't know if you've seen any of these photos.
Well, it looks like smoke.
Yeah.
Or like some type of
smoke or gossamer, cheesecloth.
Sometimes it's just stuff weird coming out of their nose and all this sort of stuff. But, what I saw was something that did look kind of like smoke, and you could kind of see it forming
around
your fingers, between your fingers. I saw, there was like a bottle, I don't know, it was a glass container filled with water. And you could kind of see it sort of almost, it was just a glass of water. It was a bowl of water. It looked like kind of almost dry ice coming from the surface, but it was not. It was just a still thing of water. After the medium became engaged, there was, just weird, just things like, pictures on the wall sort of began to strange. It was sort of a weird experience, and I didn't know what to make of it. It is... again, this is that realm that I'm sure that scientists would have some perfectly reasonable explanation for it. But at any rate, what I witnessed was not the very dramatic ectoplasm that you see in these old photographs. But I did see something, and I think most of the people in the room with me saw something as well.
But I think that speaks to an experience that when I talk to people about their experiences and when they have... they see or feel or sense stuff, and even reading kind of more contemporary literature in this, that the supernatural isn't loud and big. It's very subtle and quiet, right? It is the rapping noises. It's the whisper in your ear. It's the small movement of something. It's the flickering of light. It is these kind of smaller things that are more like the ectoplasm and seeing that aura around you, right? It's not banging pails and doing this. Now we have poltergeists, which that gets into a whole other argument about stuff, what those are, but I think that's really kind of true to our realm. We're working in the seance, and even with ghost hunters and speaking to ghost hunters, you'll hear the bang and the knock, but there's no we don't see the cinematic windows all flying shattered out. And
I think the interplay between magicians and mediums. I think that a lot of this sort of dramatic display becomes a lot of these conjurers will end up sort of aping spiritualist practices and create bigger and bigger productions, right? So to the extent that ectoplasm is a thing, I'm not going to sit here and bet my life on it that it is, but it's not probably like what these crazy things that we've sometimes seen images of. I think it's something more subtle, and that it may be that at some point, in our past, when you see these sort of crazy images, that they've taken something that's very subtle and they've made it very theatrical.
Yeah.
And so things flying off the walls and crazy stuff like that. I think that, as Albert said over and over again, I think that a lot of these spiritualist experiences are very subtle. They are real. I mean, they're real in the sense that they are real experiences and they are something that everyone in the room will have experienced. But Albert during our sessions will kind of do this disclaimer and he say, don't come into this seance room thinking that all the chairs are going to stack up on a table and that, that we're all going to fly around. That's just not going to happen. That's not going to happen. I mean, if David Copperfield was doing a seance, it might happen, but you'd know that that was a magic show.
Yeah.
Right? But if you want a real experience, as real as it's going to, as real as possible, it's going to be something much more subtle.
And you have there's a little history, like a fun, interesting story. As there's a woman named Helen Duncan who's in England, and she is a medium, and she's the last woman in England to be tried as a witch. And this was during the Second World War, I believe, the Second World War. And she was tried as a witch because she was able to tell people information that she should not have known or anybody else. So specifically, people would come to her because they want to know if their son is alive on the warship that's going out at sea, and they've heard nothing, right? And she would channel and be like, the ship sunk this week and nobody has said anything, and he wants you to know. And so she would do this. So the government was like, oh, no, we can't have the psychic giving this information out. Like, this is too sensitive, right? She can't be doing this. So they tried her as a witch and imprisoned her to stop her, to shut her up, right? But part of her seance, the first half of her seance, was this very physical manifestation, things where spirits would appear and this and that. And all accounts of it was so ridiculous. It was so bad. Like, you could tell these were paper mache masks on gossamers, and she's doing all this woo, right? But everybody knew that was part of the show to get to this other part, right? They didn't care about that front end of these big physical manifestations. What they really were looking for was this real, the real experience, which was, I'm now going to talk to your loved one, and here's how I'm going to prove it, right? But she had to engage in this other part because everybody else was engaging in this other part, right? And so that ectoplasm, as Jake is saying, yes, it's this small kind of wispy thing that is there, but if somebody else says, I can create more ectoplasm, and they're pulling handkerchiefs left and right, then what are you going to engage in?
Yeah,
right?
now people expect it to be like that green glowing goop from Ghostbusters, right? And it's not that, right? It's not that at all.
Yeah.
So anyway, yeah, I mean, I think that there's been essays written. I can never pronounce her name, Simone de Beauvoir, I guess, the French philosopher, but she talks about that distinction between the medium and the magician, and the medium is a medium by definition, and there's a passive vessel, and the magician feels like they have to be in control, and so they're controlling the experience. The medium is a passive vessel, so there's that dichotomy, and I think that you see a lot of that that give and take, that push and pull in sort of the history of spiritualism, and how there's a parallel history of kind of magicians along the side and some charlatanism that crosses over both ways. So.
Well, I'll say magicians stole a lot from the spiritualist. A lot of the magic before the movement of, before Anton Mesmer, before mesmerism even, was, disappearing egg, or here, bounce a coin on the side, kind of weird stuff. But when you get Anton Mesmer, who's producing hypnosis, essentially, we start to get second sight and some clairvoyant stuff. And then as spiritualist movement comes in, we get spirit cabinet stuff, which is real big. Mescaline was a magician who made a lot of money. Mescaline and Cook,
and Davenport Brothers,
and then Davenport Brothers on the concept of the spirit cabinet. We get a lot of magicians that are riding the coattails of the spiritualist. They're going to these seances, and then they're like, we can replicate the same thing, right? And as we know, the ability to replicate doesn't mean that that's the method by it was being used, or the way that it's production. There's a magician, Max Maven, who has a quote: the existence of a wig doesn't mean the absence of hair, right? It's just here's a wig, and that's also like hair, but it's not, right? So you can have these two kind of parallel things, but magicians are definitely riding the coattails of the spiritualist and reproducing some of the things that are occurring in their rooms in very fantastic and fabulous ways. And the things that are occurring in the seance room oftentimes are not that fantastic, right? They're not really crazy. Peter Lamont is another historian and literature professor in England, and he has this thing where he says that, a magician, you give a magician and a psychic a piano, the magician is going to make the piano float in the air, throw a curtain on it, it's going to play Beethoven and then disappear, right? Whereas the psychic is just going to make one note play. And that shows the kind of the thing, and the magician constantly moves in this entertaining thing where the psychic is moving more into the experiential, like here's this thing, and it doesn't need to be a show, it just needs to be what it is.
That anecdote that he just said, I was going to say that to you as well, because I think that's an interesting anecdote and speaks to your idea about why is it these subtle things and not these giant things that happen, and people have thought about that, and I think that a lot of these I won't say it without exception, because who knows what there is in history, but I do know that a lot of the most spectacular sort of effects ascribed to mediums were either done through charlatanism or through magicians. So I think for that reason, it kind of brings us back full circle to why the spiritualist church, who's very serious about their faith, are very wary about physical mediums doing sort of physical mediumship under the umbrella of the spiritualist church, because of kind of these things that Albert's describing, right? I mean, you could get David Copperfield to get that piano to float around and disappear, but we would all know it's a magic trick, right? And so if a physical medium's doing that, then you've got to question what's happening there, right? And so that's kind of what we've, again, full circle, that's what we've tried to maintain, that veracity with regards to our own presentations, and allow the sitters to draw their own conclusions. We don't sell religion, we sell an experience. And so this is experience, we invite you to experience it, and then you can decide for yourself what it is that you make of all this.
Yep. Well, I think what you guys do is really cool.
Thank you.
I had this completely different idea, like I got this image of like the haunting in Connecticut. All this stuff is moving around.
Yeah.
But where can people find you? Where can they?
Well, let me give you a quick plug. Sure. So austinséance.com is the short answer. We do public sessions throughout the state. We're mostly based in Central Texas, but we're throughout the state and elsewhere on occasion. We also would encourage you to subscribe to the Austin Séance Quarterly Journal. You can find subscription information at our website. It's $25 a year, so it's cheap. But as you can tell from our conversation, that Albert and I are fascinated with the history of spiritualism and seances. And so this is a somewhat academic journal. It's about the history of seances, spiritualism, and it covers a lot of these topics that Albert and I are talking about now. We talked, for instance, about Dr. Cripple, I guess. Anyway, there's an article about him there. This Isema Palladino is a famous medium from Italy. We have an article about Mina Crandon, who's one of our favorite mediums. Her great-granddaughter is a regular contributor to the magazine. And so all of our contributors are either experts in the field or professional journalists. We have an article this month written by a friend of mine who works for the LA Times. Anyway, so it's $25 a month, $25 a year, I should say, if you're interested. There's that. You can find us there. Keep up with us there. We have Albert and I mentioned before that we are sort of a creative endeavor. Albert would be the artistic director. I'm the editorial director, and so we have a whole editorial division. We have magazines. We have little books. Albert has put together the affidavits for the first seance, the Fox Sisters in 1848. So that's available on our website. This is the first week out. This is something Albert also put together. It's a small little pamphlet on the history of table tipping, which we talked about, and also has a historical document from year is that?
1853.
1853. So we've reproduced a condensed version of a historical document about table tapping. So we have a lot of this sort of thing. So if any of your viewers are interested in finding out more, that's a real good way to do it. And then again, we're having seance. By the time this is on the air, will have already occurred. But we're conducting a seance in San Antonio on March. What's today?
30th.
March 30th, in celebration of the first seance from 1848. And then we will be conducting sessions. We'll have a seminar in September and November.
And we do workshops throughout the year. So it's not we're not a Halloween time only kind of thing. So throughout the year we're there. We're always doing stuff. So we encourage you to find out more if this is something that you're just, curious about.
Yeah.
We're accepting the cult curious.
Yeah, accept the cult curious. And also, if you go to our website and just sign up, or just an email blast, you can find out when where we'll be and when. We sell out very quickly. So if you're interested in coming to our sessions, it would be good to get tickets in advance when they become available. And also, if you're just curious to have a question, shoot us an email. You don't have to buy a ticket or anything like that. austinséance@gmail.com. And if we can answer it, we'll answer it. If we don't know the answer, we'll tell you that. If we know somebody,
find the expert that
find
can.
the expert that can, right?
Yeah.
So,
yeah, this has been great. So,
we have to do this again because
we just touched the iceberg.
Yeah,
we didn't even get into
so many more questions. But guys, thank you so much for coming down.
Absolutely, it's been our great pleasure, and we really, really enjoyed it. And thank you for having us on your program.
Thank you.
All right, guys. Thanks. See you later.
Bye.